Hi guys, welcome to Mr. Dyer's Musings. I'm Mr. Dyer, and today we're going to be taking a look at something that I thought I did a while ago, and I was reviewing my videos, and it turns out that I just did it. We're going to talk about the hospital steward. As always, I'd like to thank my wife and family for their unconditional support. I'd like to thank my students and my scouts. I'd like to thank my subscribers, you for watching this video. I'd like to thank my patrons on Patreon. We've got some exciting things that's coming up, guys. I'm really excited. I got some good news that I'll share with you. I just got informed that I reached out to the Ohio History Connection, and they're willing to work with me on doing some historical videos here in Ohio on various sites. So I'm really stoked. We're going to get some professionals talking about Ohio history. Like, I'm geeking out. I hope you guys are excited. This summer is going to be really exciting. And we got to thank the patrons on Patreon for that, because all the money that they've given to this effort, I put aside, and some of it went to the production when I was using my old video editing software and stuff, but most of it I put aside just so that we could take the show on the road. So if that's something you want to be a part of, consider it. The link's down below. Check out Patreon on Mr. Dyer's Musings. Okay, so let's talk about the hospital steward. If you notice, I'm not dressed in my usual Civil War surgeon's jacket, because generally speaking, when I do these videos, I try to represent what I talk about. Well, after COVID and everything, and I reenacting here in Ohio, there's been less and less opportunities and stuff, and I've been really focusing on my surgeon's impression. And as you know, I wanted to branch out and do some of the historic Boy Scouting, historical camping. So I need some scratch. So I started off selling off some things that I really didn't use that much. In the last 5 years, I might have used my hospital steward's uniform maybe twice. Okay, other than that, it's just sitting in my closet. So I am wearing my vest. So the hospital steward, the reason why this is brought up now, even though I thought I did this video, is because I had someone reach out to me and ask, what did the hospital steward exactly do? And the specifics. Everybody wants to know, well, what's the uniform and things like that. The hospital steward was easily probably the most overworked enlisted man that worked in the medical department. They were a catch-all. They're a catch-all kind of position. And what's interesting is, even though the regulations, the regulations may say one thing, there's a lot of evidence, especially once you read memoirs and stuff, that the regulations weren't really followed when it came to these guys. Couple reasons. Let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. The hospital steward was the highest ranking enlisted soldier in the medical department. The medical department, from the beginning of the Civil War in 1861 to the end in 1865, saw a tremendous amount of change, thanks to Dr. Hammond, Dr. Letterman, etc. So the hospital steward in 1861, there weren't a whole lot of hospitals, right before the war broke out. And there were kind of a few specialized individuals who mostly had some type of education in pharmacy. Okay? Think about that, in pharmacy. And they were mostly put out in posts. You think about the West and the Indian territories, etc. They're mostly put out in posts, and they were assistants to the surgeons. Their pharmaceutical expertise allowed them to mix medications, to handle prescriptions, or what was called script, from the doctors. But they didn't have a lot of people under them until the American Civil War happened. They might have had one or two nurses to help out with the post-hospital, but for the most part, the hospital steward's main focus was being clerical and doing pharmacy. Okay? Clerical and doing pharmacy. And within that job, as the head enlisted non-commissioned officer, which, by the way, ranked about sergeant major, they're equivalent to the ordnance sergeant. So they were a staff sergeant. which is why they wore crimson on their pant leg. But we digress. The hospital steward was responsible for keeping records for any enlisted personnel served in the hospital. So think nurses, think cooks, think laundrers or laundresses, think matrons. So like anybody that would serve in the hospital would report to the hospital steward. And right before the Civil War, that wasn't a big deal. Like it was a big job, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't as big as it exploded. Like all those tasks when a war is going on is a lot. There's a lot going on, okay? Because, out in the frontier, okay, you break a leg, okay, you had an axe accident for chopping wood or going out building roads or whatever. So these things happen. People get sick. You're keeping records of only a few people in the post hospital. When the war broke out, though, because you're having tons of wounded, that job is a lot. And they did start expanding the amount of hospital stewards that were permitted to regiments and corps, etc. But generally speaking, for one regiment, you get one hospital steward. Okay, one regiment, you get one hospital steward. A regiment at the beginning of the war was supposed to be, by the book, about 1,000 men. Okay, and that's fine when you're not fighting. But when there's a war going on and people are constantly getting sick, especially when you think about sickness as being the number one killer during the American Civil War, and then you have battles, you have accidents that happen, doing fatigue duty or whatever, that becomes a huge job. So they start allowing more and more hospital stewards in each regiment. But here's the problem. There weren't that many people actually educated in pharmacy that would qualify in the ideal sense to be a hospital steward. So pharmacy, the pharmacist of the hospital, of the regiment, or whatever, that's a very specialized person. And since there was such a shortage, people started getting recruited who were just really apt at being clerical, okay? Which is huge because, beyond just being a pharmacist, a hospital steward was the hospital administrator. They had all those people that's under them. They had to make sure that the dietary needs, like they go and make visits to the cooks, breakfast, supper, and dinner. Supper, right? Breakfast, supper, and dinner. Or dinner and supper. Anyhow, so they had to make those rounds to inspect the food, to inspect the dietary cards of the sick that were under them, making sure that it was quality. They also had to make sure that all these different things are ordered. When you're thinking about a hospital and you got all these people that's under your care, you are responsible for ordering the medications, the food, the hay, the wood, the whatever, okay? It's a lot. It is a lot. It's a big job. Now, if you're considering being a hospital steward in living history, the first thing you need to get or check out is the Hospital Steward's Manual, okay? This is really good. It covers the nit grit of the job from top to bottom, but you have to put this in consideration that this was really written for more of a standalone main hospital position, not so much out in the field, okay? Not so much in the field. To get an idea of what hospital stewards did out in the field, you need to read memoirs. That's the best thing to do. Like, find some diaries, but memoirs are excellent. Memoirs are excellent. When I first started doing my research for hospital stewards, I live in Ohio. I'm representing an Ohio regiment. So I try to find memoirs of that state of a hospital steward. And I did find one. And it was by Solon Hyde of the 17th Ohio, which luckily for me, when I first started, I was actually looking into the 17th Ohio because Fairfield County, where I'm from. Anyways, doesn't matter. So Solon Hyde was a hospital steward of the 17th Ohio, and he ended up getting captured and getting sent to Andersonville. But before he got captured, in the memoir, he talked about his daily duties. And then even once he was captured, he talked about his daily duties because the Confederacy used him. I mean, this guy is worth a lot of money if you think about it in terms of money. You know, there's such a shortage of medicines already in the Confederacy. The Union's having trouble finding qualified hospital stewards. If the Confederacy gets a hospital steward, you're darn straight they're going to be using them. So he did get not pressed into service. You know, it's completely his choice and everything, but he got benefits for helping out. And in the medical profession, you're supposed to give aid to those who need it. So, long story short, excellent book. Check out Solon, Hyde. Another book that I would suggest you get to get a slight deeper understanding is, I put it in a lot of my other videos, but Practicing Medicine in the Black Regiment. Before that book, the same author, Dr. Weil, he was a medical cadet in Washington, D.C. So he interacted with a lot of the hospital stewards, and he mentions and talks about a lot of the hospital stewards. So I would suggest reading that one. Now, granted, he's a medical cadet, so he's technically an officer. Sort of, you know, he ranks above non-commissioned officers, but equivalent of a cadet at West Point, for example, or Annapolis. But Memoirs is really where you're going to get the nitty-gritty of the job. Out in the field, what did they do? The hospital steward did all the clerical stuff. Most of the medicines were shipped in from Washington, D.C. or Philadelphia or wherever. Cincinnati had a depot. So most of the medicines were shipped in. But sometimes, if a doctor prescribes something very specific as far as quantity or whatever, the hospital steward was required to mix up those medicines and for the prescriptions and get them to the sick. There's even a specialized medicine wagon that was developed for this purpose out in the field. You had a hospital steward's tent, so he had kind of a mobile pharmacy, which is pretty cool. He would also still be responsible for all the food and the cooks and things like that for the hospital. He would attend out in the dressing station to assist the assistant surgeon or possibly surgeon, usually assistant surgeon, at a dressing station behind the line of battle when a battle was going on. That's how Solon Hyde got captured. He could possibly be at the main field hospital, again, assisting the surgeons, making sure things going on. Before triage was really developed, and I use the term triage lightly, but really that's what it is, and when we put it in comparison to today, the hospital steward and the assistant surgeon, but a lot of times it would have been the hospital steward, would have done the triage aspect of battlefield medicine, marking and identifying which soldiers, sick or wounded, needed attention first. Okay, so they were kind of a screen, if you will, of where things would go after a battle or during a battle. What was a hospital steward permitted to do? A lot of people want to compare the hospital steward to an EMT. An EMT has a lot more leniency when it comes to medications and first aid care than what a hospital steward had. Even in the hospital steward's manual, it talks about, you know, you're not going to be bandaging the wounded or the sick or wounded. You know, like there's some things in here, it talks about some bandaging towards the end of the book. But even in the book, it says, for the most part, that's not your job, right? Because it's a very specialized skill, you know. So a lot of things were not trusted to the hospital stewards, and the assistant surgeons are the ones that had to go around and do that kind of work. When it comes to medications, you could make up the medications, but you couldn't actually per se prescribe medications. Even on the battlefield, you couldn't just say, hey, this person's got this thing going on. I'm going to go onto the case and grab some opiates and give to the soldier to make him feel better. That's not your job. You might have been allowed to give brandy or coffee. You know, those things, believe it or not, were considered pretty minor medicines. You're trying to get, what's the word I'm looking for? Believe it or not, alcohol is a stimulant. Alcohol was actually considered a stimulant instead of a depressant. We know that's different today. But same thing with coffee. Coffee, back then, it was a diuretic. So anyhow, so those minor things, yes, you could find examples of them being used, but for the most part, you're not going to be prescribing or giving medications to the patients without the okay of the surgeon or assistant surgeon. What did you wear? For the most part, if you're getting into the hobby, if you spend any time with any reenactors, they're going to tell you, well, you need to do some research. You need to find out what your regiment is and what were they issued. There's some leniency when it comes to staff sergeants. You do have the regulations, right? That's a good starting point. But you also have a lot more money coming in as a staff sergeant than what you did as an enlisted. You got enlisted gear. You didn't have to buy your own gear. But there is plenty of evidence, picture evidence, of stewards wearing what's considered officers' sack coats, or private purchase sack coats is what they are, and private purchase insignia. There's a wide variety of insignia out there than just the standard. But to be safe, especially if you're just starting out in the hobby, and it's a lot cheaper to be honest, but if you're just starting out in the hobby and you want to do a steward's impression, get just a plain sack coat. If you don't have anywhere else to go to get information, just get a sack coat. Get the standard chevrons, and that'll do you. And then as you start developing your impression, you start doing more of your reading, maybe you find a steward that you really are interested in, you find out about their story, like Solon, Hyde, and you can identify a picture of that person. By all means, then build an impression that fits that individual person, and you can go into the background about it and explain it. But for the most part, in general, just getting a sack coat for fatigue duty and the chevrons will do you. Don't get a frock coat. Everybody wants to get a frock coat because it looks really nice. It does. People say Marines today have the best uniforms. I think they do. But you're going to be out in the field in this thing. You're going to be moving around. If you think about it, you're going to get bloody. You're going to get puked on. You're going to get spit on. Like, it doesn't make sense to wear your frock coat. And it's hotter, okay? Even the most well-made, most authentic frock coat that's out there, the sack coats, due to it being looser and everything, will be a lot more comfortable for you. You'll be able to move around a lot more. So get a sack coat. As far as pants, it depends on the year, depends on the regiment. For the most part, just get yourself a pair of sky blue trousers. You can get the piping down the side. That's perfectly okay. It would be the 2-inch crimson or maroon, not crimson, but the maroon, the wine maroon color tape down your pants leg. Don't get red. You got to get the maroon color, okay? Because you're a staff sergeant, just like the ordnance sergeant. Okay, so we're going to take a look on page 17 of the Hospital Steward's Manual, and I'm going to read from it, so bear with me here. But hospital stewards may be appointed from the enlisted men of the Army or may be specially enlisted. The appointment is in every case made by the Secretary of War. Non-commissioned officers or soldiers may be appointed hospital stewards on the recommendation of the senior medical officer of the hospital, post, or command. This recommendation must be endorsed by the company commander and the commanding officer of the post or detachment, and forwarded by the latter to the adjutant general of the Army. As the object of these more permanent appointments is to procure the services of a more competent body of hospital stewards, no soldier nor citizen must henceforth be recommended for appointment who is not known to be temperate, honest, and in every way reliable, as well as sufficiently intelligent and skilled in pharmacy for the proper discharge of the responsible duties likely to be devolved upon him. Hospital stewards may also be enlisted as such from civil life. Applications in the handwriting of the candidate should be addressed to the Surgeon General, accompanied by testimonials as to character and competency. The enlistment is for the term of 3 years. At the expiration of his enlistment, should he desire, the hospital steward may be re-enlisted by the commanding officer on the recommendation of the medical officer. He is then entitled, as are all enlisted men on re-enlisting, to $2 per month additional pay and $1 per month for each subsequent period of 5 years service, provided he re-enlists within 1 month after the expiration of his term of service. When enlisted men are appointed hospital stewards, the appointment is for the remaining unexpired term of service. When enlisted men of the volunteer service are appointed hospital stewards in the regular Army, they must first be discharged from service. All right. Now, there is a clause in here for temporary stewards. So the recommendation of the medical officer detailed to a soldier to act as temporary steward. These temporary stewards are generally designated as acting hospital stewards. At posts of more than 4 companies, they receive $22 per month and the allowance of hospital steward. With smaller bodies of troops, the pay and allowance of a sergeant of infantry. These temporary appointments may be regarded as affording the means of a careful probation of all soldiers so detailed who are ambitious of one day serving a permanent appointment. Okay, so what does it require? What are some requirements to be a hospital steward? Should not be less than 18, no more than 35 years of age. He must be able-bodied and free from disease. Previous to his enlistment, he is inspected by a medical officer in the same manner as any other recruit, and will be rejected if found laboring under any disease or disability, which would reject a recruit. He should be of honest and upright character. Now, the reason why that they need somebody to be honest and upright character and temperate habits, they didn't drink, is because the hospital steward was responsible for the drugs and the liquor that was used by the hospital and for the surgeons. They were the ones that made receipts and made all the orders for, and like pharmacists, they had to create the prescriptions when they were given. He must have a competent knowledge of the English language and be able to write legibly and spell correctly. This point must be satisfactorily ascertained before he can be enlisted, as without this qualification it will be impossible for him to keep the books and records or to attend to the general business of the hospital. In addition, he must have sufficient practical knowledge of pharmacy to enable him to take exclusive charge of the dispensary. See, you have to have some type of medical knowledge. Must be practically acquainted with such points of minor surgery as the application of bandages and dressings, the extraction of teeth, and the application of cups and leeches, and must have such knowledge of cooking as will enable him to superintend efficiently this important branch of hospital service. He should be industrious, temperate, patient, and good-tempered, and actuated by an honorable desire to administer to the extent of his ability the necessities and comforts of the sick and wounded soldiers who are placed under his charge. On receiving his appointment, the hospital steward receives from the Office of Adjutant General a warrant made out in the following form. Yada, 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 yada. Okay, so that introductory part of this manual literally lays out everything that the hospital steward was responsible for, what they were supposed to do. And we'll break them down a little bit. But let's talk about the uniform. The hospital steward should always wear his undress uniform in the hospital, except on those occasions such as musters and inspections, on which it is necessary for him to appear in full dress. This point is of more importance than at first sight appears. The strictest military discipline is absolutely necessary in a military hospital, and it will be too generally found that an unmilitary neglect of regulations in regard to dress coexists with a general neglect of discipline and regulation in regard to their duties. The uniform of the hospital steward, for fatigue purposes, that is for all ordinary duties, consists of the blouse or sack coat and trousers prescribed by regulations for all foot soldiers. The trousers are to have upon the outer seam of each leg a stripe of crimson worsted lace, 1.5 inch wide. It is advisable that the half chevron described for the full uniform of the hospital steward should also be worn upon the undressed coat. He should take enough pride in his personal appearance to keep his clothes neat and his boots clean and well blacked. The undressed cap is the regulation forage cap, similar to that of other enlisted men. The full uniform of the hospital steward consists of the uniform coat, which is a dark blue cloth, yada, 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 right? Trousers of dark blue cloth with a stripe of crimson, lace 1.5 inch wide, down. A hat, a black felt hat, the same as that of all enlisted men. The cord of buff and green mixed the wreath in front of the brass with the letters US in Roman of white metal. So there's a little metal US that goes on the hat. And what they're talking about there is the Hardy hat, okay? That's the dress hat. Cravat or stock, black leather, the same as that of all enlisted men. Boots or shoes should be issued to all enlisted men. There's a red worsted sash that's worn around twice. The sword and belt plate is the same for all non-commissioned officers. Sword, the same as all for non-commissioned officers. And you have the half chevron. Something to note is that hospital stewards were mounted. Okay, hospital stewards are actually mounted enlisted soldiers. So normally you would have the one side cocked up if you're a foot soldier, or if you're an enlisted soldier and you're wearing the hardy hat, the other side's going to be cocked up. So keep that in mind. Boots are going to probably be more practical for you as a soldier out in the field instead of brogans, because you are going to be mounted. Anything else to kind of note? That's pretty much it. That's pretty much it, okay? So for uniform, that breaks it down. Let's talk about some duties. When you think about a hospital administrator and all the duties that entails, that's kind of what the hospital steward did. They had to have such a broad qualifications because there was so much put on them. They were a bookkeeper, they were a pharmacist, they were essentially a nurse, right? What we consider more of a nurse anyways. They even would help out the assistant surgeons and surgeons during operations. When there was a battle going on, a hospital steward might follow the assistant surgeon out on a dressing station to help them with that, help triage and direct, along with a nurse, again, to help the assistant surgeon take care of those on the front lines. Maybe help direct the ambulances. It's a big job. It's a huge, huge job. And it would take a specialized person to do it, an educated person to do it. And handwriting was extremely important because they're doing all that bookkeeping. Now, let's talk about some other sources. Again, the Hospital Steward's Manual is going to be your best bet. You know, you can read it for free, read it for free, read it free. You can read it free. I'll put the link down there so you make it easier to find. But the book is really handy because it does tell you about what forms to put, how to fill out passes, how to register the patients, how the day should be ran. You're responsible as the hospital steward to make sure the ventilation of the hospital is taken care of, whether it be a post and you're opening up windows and closing the windows, or even out in the field, especially during the winter, you're responsible for keeping those tents heated. You're going to be responsible for making sure that there's enough wood or coal to heat the stoves, making sure all the requisitions for all the food. It's a huge, huge job. And one thing I really like about the Hospital Steward's Manual is in the very back, it does have recipes for, big groups of people. And it talks about and instructs the hospital steward how to essentially the diet, okay, how to handle the diet, because you got these doctors, all these different doctors who are going to prescribe specific diets. Is it a light diet or a heavy diet? And the hospital steward is going to be responsible for making sure all of that is kept track of and properly administered. So it's a fascinating role. There's on the very back, it gives some hints on bandaging, like that. Again, the recipes. It even shows you how to make a bandage roller. So if that's something you're interested in, there you go. Check it out. Now, my experience from reading different memoirs, it's fascinating to read the memoirs of hospital stewards because every day was a completely different day. Like I said before, one day they might be assigned overseeing the kitchens. The next day they might be assigned to writing the books or keeping the register. One day they might be assigned of ordering the supplies or inventory. One day they might be assigned to go with the surgeon on a requisition run from the commissary, from a post, or even from the town, civilians that they're dealing with. that's it. Again, read the book. It tells you a lot more in detail than what I have enough time to do. But just keep in mind, you're going to be a pharmacist, you're going to be a record keeper, and you got to be on it in regards to the overseeing all those who are under you, the nurses, the matrons, the cooks, the laundresses, anyone else, okay, that's not an officer. They're going to be under you. I hope that was helpful. I hope that it's a little enlightening. I know it's kind of vague, but it's huge. It's a huge job. Okay, read the book. That's what I suggest. It's fascinating. Hook up with another surgeon. That way they can also teach you the ropes, because bandaging is kind of a technique that you got to practice and learn. So I would suggest that as a skill. Work on your writing. Like, check out Spencerian writing and practice Spencerian or copperplate, but especially Spencerian writing. That'll get you used to the period writing. Get the right ink, get the right nib, things like that. It'll make your life a lot easier. Or just use pencil. Pencil was certainly practical back then as well. Ink and nibs, they were kind of expensive, so the government loved to pass out pencils instead. If you have any questions, specific questions that I might be able to expand on or enlighten you on, please ask. Put the comment in below and tell me, what do you think would be the hardest job of a hospital steward at the time of the American Civil War? What's your opinion? I hope that was helpful. Please like the video if you liked it, if you found it useful. Please pass it on and share it. Please consider checking out my Patreon, supporting our channel, so when we go out this summer, we can go to more places and bring you some really cool content about our backyard of Ohio. Give a kiss and hug to your loved ones. Have a wonderful week. Take care.